Okay, so in this section of the tutorial, what we're looking at is how we're going to get data back from the user control into our Windows form. So in the previous examples, we've looked at how we can create the employee property, and basically that was going to be used by the user control to associate any data coming in from the Windows form to the user control, and we basically associate that with the text boxes. Now what we need to do is the reverse of that. And so how the person in the Windows Forms is going to be able to pull that data back from us is via the employee property. However, the employee property in our previous example was just a simple auto-implemented get and set. So what we're doing this time is that we're expanding that so that when someone calls the get part of the property, we want to be able to look into the text boxes and pull back that data. So build up an employee object based on what data is in the text boxes. So over here I've created an employee member, an employee field, and you'll see that it's got a lowercase e, and it's of data type employee. So that's going to be used to kind of build up our true representation of an employee. And then our property is going to wrap around that field so that we can get data and associate the data that the user has sent us from the Windows form with the property, and associate the data from the text boxes with the field. So in the set part, what we're doing is we're just taking whatever value the user, the developer in the Windows Forms section associates with this property. So we're taking the data from the Windows Forms and taking it into the user control. So we're taking the value and associating it with our new employee field, and that's just a simple direct kind of mapping. On the other hand, when we're trying to get the data, it's a little bit more tricky because we now need to kind of build up some way of checking to see if there's an employee record currently existing in our class, and if there is, then we need to update it. If there isn't, then we need to create a new instance of it. So that's what the if statement is doing at the start. It's checking to see, has the employee field been instantiated? So has someone already told us about an employee before? If they haven't, then no employee exists in the user control, so we need to instantiate a new employee. So that's just what the if statement is doing there. So if the employee is null, then create a new instance of employee. Again, with a getter in a property, you always have to return back the data type, so we're returning back the employee on the last line there. In the middle, what you'll see is this get data method. It doesn't have to be a method, but I've created it as a method just to kind of separate it out so that it's not as complicated in the getter section of the code. So let's have a look at the get data. So the get data method is defined down here, and really all it does is it takes the data from the text boxes and associates it with the properties on the employee field. So the employee field has the ID, first name, surname, and the pay, and all we're doing is extracting out the data from the text boxes and associating it with the properties. So the only complicated thing maybe there is the fact that we're doing try-pars, and the reason why we're doing that is that when we extract out the ID from the text box, it's coming as a type of string, and we just want to convert it into an int. And likewise with the text for the pay, it's in the txt pay.text property, and basically that's a string, and so we just need to convert that to a double. Then nothing else has changed in the employee control. So if we're going looking at the check down here, actually the one thing that will have changed there is this is now the employee field as opposed to the employee property. We don't want it to be the employee property, because what we're doing is trying to get the information, and so if we get it on the property, we'll end up using our get data method, which we just talked about. So this is calling the employee field because it will store the true data. There's no wrapper around that. So what we have here is just we're taking the employee field data and associating it with the text box. So don't forget, the field is the ultimate underlying store for the property, and so the property is a wrapper around that field, and so when we want to extract out data, we need to determine, are we trying to take out real data from what the user has just sent us, or are we trying to take out data that the user has changed in the text boxes. So in this particular instance, we're trying to show the data for the first time, and so the real way that we can gain access to that data is by checking the employee field. So that's the section on the employee control. So that's basically us setting up a new property, just overloading the property a little bit by using the long-handed version of the getters and setters, and basically the get is the more complicated part where we're just checking to see if the employee is not null. Then if it's not null, then we're going to get an instance of the data from the text boxes. Then if we go back into our employee control, the edit employee Windows form, if we go back in and have a look at that code, all we need to do now is to get out that information is basically get a reference to our user control, get a reference to the property, and then whatever data we want to get out of it. And so when someone calls this information, what is really going to happen is that the first name is going to be extracted from the text box as opposed to from the employee class itself. So the text box is going to come back, the value that's in the text box is going to come back to us. And so the rest of this has looked the same. We create a temporary instance of our employee here, and that's about it for this part. So we'll move on to the next section now.